So our next speaker is Keri Sather Wagstaff. And she is our program officer. She's a rotating program director at NSF, working with AGAP and the advanced programs. She did her undergraduate degree at Berkeley, and her master's and PhD at the University of Utah. And her current home institution, which I believe she may, but maybe not, be returning to next fall, is actually just down 85 at Clemson, where she is a professor in the School of Math and Statistical Sciences. Um, I have not known Keri Ann as long. I got to meet her at an AGAP meeting in Corpus Christi when she first came, I think was first starting at NSF. And she has been an incredible support. And I've had the opportunity to listen to her speak at a couple of different meetings, and she is phenomenal. I want to take a step back and tell you what her research interests are beyond NSF. And I'm going to have to tell you, Keri, that I don't even know what this means, but she does homological and combinatorial commutative algebra. Um, but so I don't even know what that means. And so I'm just going to say, wow. But she's also been an associate director for graduate studies. She has a really long history of excellent mentoring in undergraduate students, graduate students, postdocs, faculty. And she's worked a lot on those words that, in North Carolina, we can no longer say: diversity, equity, and inclusion, issues around gender, sexuality, disability, and race for a very long time. She's also a fellow of the Association of Women in Mathematics, and she understands the context, right? Being in South Carolina and politically, nationally, having had all this experience with NSF, understands the context in which we are working under currently. And so I am really excited to have her here today and have her tell us a little bit about how AGAP understands our struggles and what we can do next as we move forward. So thank you, Keri Ann, for being here.
I appreciate that introduction very much. Good morning, everyone. And I also do want to welcome you on behalf of the National Science Foundation. So I am your managing program director. I'm very proud of the work that you've been doing, especially under the circumstances that you've been doing them in. As Yvette said, my name is Keri Ann Sather Wagstaff. I do go by Keri Ann. My pronouns are she, her. I want to thank you all for prioritizing safety and the decision to move this meeting online. I was just past Richmond on my drive down 95, and the whatever numbers that turns into on the way down, when I got a text from my colleague Keri, and I went through a real emotional roller coaster when I got that, because for me this trip was very symbolic, as my first trip to a state where I don't feel safe as a transgender person. Um, and the last place that I went was Corpus Christi, actually, and maybe some of you heard me speak about that at um, the AGEP meeting in October. But so it was a real symbolic power move on my behalf to be making the drive down there. And so I was disappointed for a lot of reasons and not getting to finish the trip, but grateful for the prioritization of everyone's safety around that. And that was definitely the highest priority in my mind. Um, Before I start, I want to thank Mark for his wonderful presentation that really kind of set some things up for me nicely. Um, and grateful for you all for inviting Mark to talk to you. I really think that we need to be looking at the UC system, and I say this not just as an alum, um, but watching. So UCLA was the only large research institution that I know of that actually increased its demographic diversity in its incoming class this year, if or one of few. And I think that they have learned a lot in those 25 plus years of living without affirmative action that a lot of us can learn from, and try to adapt. So having Mark contribute to that conversation is really good. Um, he made so many, really think that I should just put my slides away and we should just talk about the things that he talked about because he raised some really interesting, some really important points. And one of them that I'll mention and then throw it away for another day's conversation is why in the heck would postdocs want to become faculty members ever? And not just from a financial standpoint, but of the way that we treat faculty members. So when I interviewed at the National Science Foundation, they asked if I had any questions. And I said, let's talk about work-life balance. Let's talk about a 40-hour work week. I'm going to watch your all faces as I said that out loud. I see Kim, right? Imagine interviewing a potential assistant professor for a tenure track job and them saying, talk to me about a 40-hour work week is laughable, right? I think that the way that we treat our colleagues, some of the smartest people on planet Earth, is absolutely abusive. And I thought about this a lot when I interviewed for AGEP because the goal of AGEP, and I'll talk about this a little bit, is to diversify the professoriate. That's our goal. Full stop. And I talked to Mark Letty about this when I was, coming on board, and I said, Mark, why in the heck would we want that? I mean, I want that for me, but until we change the culture, why would we inflict that on anyone as a priority choice? So that's something for us to think about, and for us to talk about. That's my moonshot. Is that what we call the things? Is to change that culture to be a lot less abusive and focusing not just on diversity, but really creating spaces that are inclusive and support belonging, um, and support human flourishing. And you'll hear me use that language a lot. I take that from Francis Tu, who is a mathematician, and I will not be talking about homological or combinatorial commutative algebra today. You're welcome, but I'm also happy to talk about that if folks want to use the Q&A time for that. Um, so I am here to try and convince you to apply for more federal grants from the AGEP program, and to talk to you about how AGEP 2.0, as I refer to it, um, is a little bit more administration proof than the previous models of individual pathway programs and support programs that focus on helping individuals with diverse demographic backgrounds to enter the academic workforce. I am going to mention some things that I will use words like administration or executive order today. I will not use the words Republican or Democrat. Okay, so I have to be very careful about the Hatch Act as a representative of the federal government. And so I'm not allowed to discuss partisan issues. I am allowed to discuss political issues as they impact our ability to do this federally funded work. Okay. And so when you hear me speak, I will be very careful in some of the language that I use. And I want us to understand that. I do have a few slides, and I'm going to not do it in one shot. I'm going to do it in. So there's a click. We should all see the correct view. Are we happy with the view? Good. And now I'm going to go to this view for me. Hopefully that didn't change anything for y'all. Great. Thanks, Otella. So the title today is Future Direction of AGEP, and we could stop and just start taking questions there. And the answer for a lot of your questions is, I don't know. Okay. Um, so this first section I added this morning after Yvette was introducing sort of the day and saying, Keri Ann's going to talk about uncertainty. I was like, okay, sure, I'll do that. No, and I think that it's important. This is something that is on everybody's mind. I added this slide after hearing Mark talk, so I appreciate Mark very much. It's been a busy morning. So AGEP is right, as the title slide said, Alliances for Graduate Education and the Professoriate. We are housed in the Division of Equity for Excellence in STEM. So one of those words that Yvette mentioned that we're not allowed to utter, or we are being recorded. So we'll see about the utterances as we go forward. But there it is. It's right there in the title. Okay. And to piggyback on something Mark said, that the wording was chosen very intentionally, equity for excellence, not equity and excellence, equity for excellence. We believe with all of our being that equity is absolutely crucial for excellence in STEM. And we put our name on it. Okay. Now that makes this work hard. So for instance, thanks to Mark, I learned that I've been following the executive orders very closely, but I missed this one. So an executive order that came yesterday, ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. Love it. Terminating illegal discrimination in the federal government. Sounds good. The director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, that's the group that oversees the National Science Foundation, for instance, shall terminate all equity programs. Full stop, right? Those are the words that I see highlighted when I read this. What does this mean for EES? What does this mean for AGEP? I have no idea, right? This landscape is shifting tectonically in real time every minute. Um, So we will hopefully receive guidance from the director's office. We received some preliminary guidance yesterday regarding the January 20th executive orders that impact us in the workforce. I don't know how quickly we'll see guidance around this issue. And I say this, I point this out not to start a panic, but I want everybody to be on the same page. I'm a big fan of openness and transparency within the bounds of what I'm allowed to do. And so this is, I am fielding so many emails right now about can our should I even apply? And so my job is extra hard to convince you to apply to a program that may not exist. Right? So our application deadline for Catalyst Alliances is March 25th. The current continuing resolution, short-term government funding law expires on March 14th. That is another, I call these singularities in space-time. I'm a big fan of the original Dune books. We do not know how to see anything past that point, and we'll be following the federal budgeting process very closely. This doesn't help you to decide whether to invest your precious time and bandwidth into submitting an application. So on that happy note, I want to talk about where AGEP 2.0, which is focused on these two lovely words, around our goal and objective. Um, And this is front and center. So we're in the Directorate for STEM Education, and you can see using our PowerPoint template down at the bottom, the slogan, preparing a diverse STEM workforce, full stop, right? So it's baked into the bones of our whole directorate. And our program to foster the group, to increase the number of historically underrepresented minority faculty in STEM. And that's old-fashioned language from the congressional mandate that there's context for down at the bottom of the slide. Our goal is diversity. Our strategy is equity. Okay, and this is where the program becomes more administration proof than it was before. So we're focused on systemic or institutional change initiatives that promote equity. And I'm going to talk about what that means in the coming slides and how I think about that and why that's a little bit more administration proof than previous iterations. What do I mean by systemic or institutional change? I mean uh, policies, practices, procedures, culture, and climate in institutions that create barriers to full human flourishing in STEM. Examples of that include, and these are quotes from the solicitation here. Um, Practices that result in inequitable allocation and or valuing of service or teaching assignments. Policies and procedures that fail to mitigate implicit bias in hiring, tenure, and promotion. Right? Unclear academic performance expectations. Academic leaders' lack of knowledge and experience around equitable leadership practices. So these are the types of policies, practices, procedures, culture, and climate that we think about. And these are just for instances. We have an entire portfolio, and I bring in the advanced portfolio in addition to the AGEP portfolio, which is also focused on systemic change. So the goal is diversity, but the strategy is systemic change. And the way that I think about this, good, is that so there are two ways that we can diversify our workforce. We can help individuals one at a time, one at a time, one at a time to overcome known barriers, right? We know that our tenure and promotion policies are unclear and there's a hidden curriculum, right? And so what do? We create mentoring programs in order to help people to survive those, right? And to overcome those barriers one at a time, one at a time. Instead of identifying and dismantling those barriers, right? Mentoring, pathway programs, professional development initiatives, super important, but they're not sustainable. And you all who have had to fund those at the administrative level every year, same. When are we going to solve this problem instead of just treating the symptom? That's what AGEP 2.0 does. So we have federal resources at the moment to support proposals that are focused on organizational self-assessments in order to effectively identify the barriers to advancement for AGEP populations, and then other federal funds in order to dismantle those barriers and to replace them with systems that are more equitable and just. Okay. And I'm going to talk about how this is administration proof as we go forward. We're leveling the playing field for all. Okay. So we're making our systems more equitable and just for everyone in STEM with specific attention to the needs that have been identified from individuals with marginalized identities. And we have to make this switch because of the recent reinterpretations of the Civil Rights Act that prohibit bestowing benefits on individuals based on demographic characteristics, right? And that's been a long time coming, but it's sort of been made unofficially official with the SCOTUS decision on affirmative action that Mark talked about earlier today. In SF, we love our acronyms. So we have two tracks now. We have the ACA and the ITA, ACA, ITA. So ACA stands for AGEP Catalyst Alliance, an acronym within an acronym, which is perfect, right? And so this is where we study the problem. This is a research grant that allows you to conduct a mixed methods organizational self-assessment to identify those barriers and to develop a 5-year strategic plan for if you had more money from the federal government, how would you dismantle those barriers? The funds in order to actually do that dismantling is the ITA track. That's the Institutional Transformation Alliance. And that's where you get the big money, right? So 400,000 over 2 years for the ACA, up to 4.4 million over 4 years, I think, for the ITA, okay, to actually dismantle it. Conversations I have with folks, I am tired of studying the problem. We know what the problem is. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. Oftentimes, our understanding of the problem, we bring in a lot of our own bias, right? I see a lot of folks who appear to me to not be racially minoritized individuals who are in here. And that brings in some privilege. It brings in some perspective that may not actually be bringing solutions that the folks that we want to uplift actually need. And so the ACA allows you to work with the folks who you want to support with institutional changes to identify what the actual barriers are. I talked to a prospective PI the other day who said, well, I want to build a leadership institute for presidents and provosts of universities. That sounds like it could be really impactful. Is that really what your Black and Brown faculty members need in order to thrive? I see value in that, but is that the number one priority of a $4.4 million award? Or there may be some departmental things that could be taken care of that would be more impactful, right? And so giving you some resources in order to dig in with a good social science research team in order to figure out what should actually be done so that we're not marching in as saviors. I like examples. This is something that I do as a mathematician as well as in this space that a lot of folks don't. So this is based on an actual advance award. So looking at a catalyst proposal that would start with a demographic concern. Okay. Black and brown women and gender expansive faculty members leave the institution prior to going up for tenure at higher rates than men faculty and white faculty, right? This is a diversity issue. How do we get at the underlying equity issue? Okay, I know that something's going on in my tenure and promotion policy. What is it? Or the practices or the procedures or the culture or the climate? But where can I really invest my resources in order to dismantle those barriers? And so the organizational self-assessment includes climate surveys, focus groups, and individual interviews. And these are examples of things that can be done for the case study with current and former faculty members of all genders and races and ethnicities. Okay, so that we're understanding how Black and brown women and gender expansive faculty members are experiencing the institution relative to the more majoritized populations. And then once those data are collected and analyzed, the proposal would propose to conduct an audit of policies, practices, and procedures with department chair focus groups to identify potential changes based on the data. And then, and only then, to start building a strategic plan based on that organizational self-assessment. Okay. Vaguely, we know that we need to update policies, practices, and procedures and leadership culture, but exactly how, we don't know, right? So this is the proposal. And then what would the actual implementation look like? That demographic concern, does the organizational self-assessment show? It shows that certain faculty work, and I know this is shocking to you, is undervalued, right? Mentoring, advising, outreach, community-based research, right? That those are undervalued and that's work that is primarily done by Black and brown women and gender expansive faculty members, okay? Not exclusively, but has a huge impact that was identified in that organizational self-assessment. And that policy audit identified that um, the promotion and tenure guidelines are misaligned with the institutional priorities, which specifically address issues like mentoring, advising, outreach, community-based research. The university says loud and proud that these are the things that we value, but they are not being valued in the tenure and promotion process. And so the strategic plan is simple. We're going to align policies, practices, procedures, and leadership culture around workload evaluation and promotion and tenure with those institutional priorities. No mention of Black, Brown, women, gender expansive individuals in that strategic plan. We're going to take our policies and align them with the institutional priorities in this specific way, right? And that as a plan for action is more administrative proof than creating affinity groups or mentoring programs or pathway programs, right? Because it's something that's going to benefit potentially everyone, but we've identified it based on those priorities from before. And I see that, wow, my plan was to talk for 15 minutes so that we had 15 minutes for questions. Um, so let me zip through the rest of these really fast here because I see that we're short on time. Organizational self-assessment, some things that I talked about here before. This is not just demographic data, right? Those climate surveys, those focus groups, those individual interviews. The budget, if you're thinking about this, no participant support costs, full stop, right? The budget should be devoted to supporting the time and bandwidth of the team who will conduct the organizational self-assessment and write and socialize the strategic plan. Okay, so this is a real paradigm shift for AGEP, right? You heard me use this phrase, Black and brown women and gender expansive faculty members. I chose that intentionally because of our focus on intersectionality, right? So intersectionality recognizes that um, individuals with multiple marginalized identities experience the university environment differently from those with single marginalized identities or with no marginalized identities. The mathematician in me hears intersection and says Venn diagram. So there's one down in the lower right for you, right? I think about this in terms of one of Crenshaw's original arguments that points out that Black women, for instance, do not only experience racism and sexism within white men majority spaces, but they also experience significant racism in feminist spaces and significant sexism in anti-racist spaces. And this is the nature of it, spaces that should be safe or not if you have those additional marginalized identities. Your ACA proposal, should you choose to pursue one, needs to include an intersectional lens that is baked in deeply. Lisa's in the room, so we've got the cupcake analogy that talks about, right, it needs to be baked deeply into the proposal and all aspects of the proposal. And the slides here include some um, aspects of operationalizing that for your proposal and there's the end of the slides. That's the remaining team after Mark Letty's retirement. I'm currently leading the AGEP program. Keri Hall is leading the ECR program. And so that's where we are right now. You can reach out to us at those email addresses or just agep@nsf.gov.